even flipping Fuller's handcar over. But Fuller just got back up, put the car back on the tracks, and kept going. This guy was the 1862 version of the Terminator. If I told you to picture the most wild, high-stakes heist movie you've ever seen, you'd probably think of Ocean's 11, Fast and Furious. You think of sports cars, high-tech gadgets, and clean getaways. But what if I told you that the craziest, most heart-pounding high-speed chase in American history involved a hijacked steam locomotive, a handful of Union soldiers in civilian disguises, and a 26-year-old Confederate conductor who literally ran on foot to chase down his stolen train? Welcome to April 12th, 1862. This is the story of Andrews Raiders and the Great Locomotive Chase. It's a tale of absolute audacity, agonizing bad luck, and extreme survival. It's also the literal birthplace of the Medal of Honor. Buckle up, because we're diving deep into a mission that was so crazy it almost sounded impossible on paper. Let's get into it. To understand why anyone would try to steal a train in enemy territory, we have to look at the map of the Civil War in early 1862. The Union Army, led by Major General Ormsby Mitchell, wanted to capture Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga was a massive rail hub. If the Union took it, they could open up the gateway right into the Deep South. But there was a problem. The Confederates could easily send reinforcements and supplies up from Atlanta using the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Enter James J. Andrews. Andrews is a civilian secret agent and contraband smuggler. He's charming, tall, smooth-talking, and fiercely intelligent, and he has a plan. The plan? Sneak a team into Georgia, hijack a northbound train, tear up the tracks, cut the telegraph wires, burn the bridges, and leave the Confederate supply line in absolute ruins. General Mitchell, he loved the idea. Andrews went to the Ohio regiments and asked for volunteers for a secret, highly dangerous mission. He didn't tell them exactly what they were going to do, just that it was dangerous. That was it. Nothing more. 22 soldiers and one civilian stepped forward. Among them was a 19-year-old private named Jacob Parrott. Now, Jacob Parrott is featured in an earlier episode as the first recipient of the Medal of Honor. The ground rules were simple. Travel in small groups, wear civilian clothes, and make your way 200 miles south to Marietta, Georgia. If anyone asked, you were Kentuckians, traveling south to join the Confederate Army. And most important rule, if you get caught in civilian clothes, you won't be treated as a prisoner of war. You will be hanged as spies. The Raiders spent days traveling through pouring rain, muddy roads, and hostile towns. By April 11, they finally reassembled in Marietta. The next morning, April 12th, they brought tickets and boarded a passenger train pulled by a beautiful, powerful, state-of-the-art steam engine called the General. About 8 miles up the track, the train made a scheduled breakfast stop. Everybody got to have breakfast at a station called Big Shanty, modern-day Kennesaw, Georgia. Now, Andrews chose Big Shanty for 2 reasons. First, didn't have a telegraph station, meaning nobody could wire ahead if something went wrong. Second, it was located right next to Camp McDonald, a Confederate training camp with thousands of soldiers. Andrews figured the rebels would never expect a heist right under their noses. While the conductor, the engineers, and the passengers all filed out of the train to go eat breakfast at the Lacey Hotel, Andrews and his men stayed behind. In a matter of seconds, they uncoupled the passenger cars, leaving only the locomotive, the tender, and 3 empty boxcars. Two of the raiders, William Knight and Wilson Brown, who were experienced civilian rail engineers, stepped into the cab. Andrews gave the signal. They pulled the throttle. The wheels spun, hissed, caught traction, and the general shot forward out of the station. The heist was a success, but the real nightmare had just begun. Back at the hotel, the train's conductor, a 26-year-old named William A. Fuller, looks out the window and sees his locomotive flying down the track. Most people would have panicked or waited for help. Not Fuller. He assumed the men were stealing it, were just deserters trying to escape. So what does he do? He starts running on foot. Seriously, this guy literally sprints down the railroad tracks after a steam engine. Fuller, along with two other rail employees, ran 4 miles. Eventually, they found a handcar, one of those pump action platforms, get you down the train tracks, and started furiously cranking it down the tracks. Meanwhile, ahead of them, Andrews and his raiders were stopping periodically to do their dirty work. They cut telegraph wires to prevent warnings from getting out ahead of them, and they tried to pry up the iron rails, but they didn't have the right tools. This slowed them down tremendously. Even worse, Andrews had to stick to the regular train schedule at first. If he went too fast, he'd crash head on to southbound freight trains coming down the single-line track. Every time Fuller's handcar got close, raiders would drop ties on the tracks. Once, even flipping Fuller's handcar over. But Fuller just got back up, put the car back on the tracks, and kept going. This guy was the 1862 version of the Terminator. Fuller's luck changed when he stumbled upon a yard locomotive called the Yonah. He ditched the handcar, fired up the engine, and took off. Later, he traded up for an even faster engine called the Texas. Here's the wild part. The Texas was heading southbound when Fuller flagged it down. There was no time to turn it around on a turntable, so Fuller took command, threw the Texas into reverse, and chased the general at speeds of over 60 miles per hour, running completely backward. In the 1860s, at 60 miles an hour, backward. If this guy had been a Union soldier, he'd have got the Medal of Honor. Anyway, back to the story. Now, it was an absolute cat and mouse game over an 87-mile stretch of track. The Raiders are in the lead, but the Texas is breathing down their necks. Andrews tries everything. They punch holes out of the back of their boxcars and drop heavy wooden ties onto the tracks to derail Fuller. Fuller's engineers just reverses, slows down slightly, bumps the ties out of the way, and keeps pushing. The Raiders try to uncouple their rear boxcars to block the tracks. Fuller, remember, he's going backwards, just hitches the Texas to the abandoned cars while moving backward and keeps on driving. The ultimate goal for Andrews was to burn the massive covered wooden bridges over the Oostenaula and Chickamauga rivers. That would have ended the chase and cut the line for good, but the weather completely betrayed them. It had been raining for days. The wood was soaked. The Raiders tried setting fire to their remaining boxcar and leaving it inside a bridge, but the damp structure wouldn't catch. Fuller arrived just in time to push the burning car right out of the bridge. By the time they passed Dalton, Georgia, the general was running on fumes. The wood supply was gone, the water pressure was dropping, and the bearings were literally melting from the speed. Just a few miles outside Ringgold, Georgia, only a handful of miles from the safety of the Union lines in Chattanooga, the steam completely died. The general sputtered to a halt. Andrews looked at his men, gave the final heartbreaking command, "Jump and scatter." Every man for himself. Great Locomotive Chase was over, but the hunt was on. The Confederate military, local militias, and tracking hounds flooded the woods. Within days, every single one of the raiders, all 22 soldiers and both civilians, were captured. Because they were caught in civilian clothing, Confederates put them on trial for espionage, and the outcomes were brutal and tragic. When those 6 exchange soldiers finally made it back to Washington, D.C. in March of 1863, they were exhausted, battered, and thin. But their country had not forgotten them. They were brought directly to the office of Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Stanton was so moved by their story of incredible bravery and the torture they withstood without giving up Union secrets that he decided to present them with a brand new award that Congress had just created. March 25th, 1863, 19-year-old Private Jacob Parrott was handed the very first Medal of Honor in U.S. history. The rest of his surviving companions received theirs moments later. Eventually, 19 of the raiders, including some of those who were executed, were awarded the medal. Andrew's raid didn't succeed in cutting the railroad, and Chattanooga didn't fall that week. But what it did do was show the world the sheer length an American soldier would go to change the course of a war. It wasn't about a perfect plan. It was about the fact that when everything went wrong, they kept pushing forward. The General and the Texas are still preserved today in museums in Georgia, silent monuments to the craziest morning of the Civil War. Thanks for hanging out on this deep dive. If you want to hear more stories about the legendary figures who wore the Medal of Honor, make sure to like, subscribe, drop me a comment below on who we should cover next. I'll see you guys in the next video.